we go. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Possibly good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We're so happy to have you for this session. Again, it's been a wonderful conference thus far, and excited to kind of see where our connections and dialogue goes in the next hour and a half. We're excited to have a wonderful panel, panel number 4. And so, in terms of the order of operations, I'll introduce our panelists before they speak, just to give you a fresh sense of who everyone is before the presentation. So we'll go in the order of Priscilla Layne, followed by Kasturi, Chatterjee, and then Araba Johnston-Arthur. And so first, um, Dr. Layne will be presenting on Cringe, Catharsis, and Queer Black German Identity, New Perspectives in German Media. Priscilla Layne's research and teaching draws on post-colonial studies, gender studies, and critical race theory to address topics like representation of Blackness in literature and film, rebellion, and the concept of the other in science fiction fantasy. In addition to her work on representation of Blackness in German culture, she also has published essays on Turkish German culture, translation, punk, and film. She's the author of White Rebels in Black, German Appropriation of African American Culture, and her current book project is on Afro-German futurism. Layne also holds an adjunct appointment in African American, and Diaspora Studies at the University of North Carolina, and is the vice president of the American Association of Teachers of German. So we're pleased to have her back again, longtime friend of the BGHRA. So Dr. Layne, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Keith. Okay, I'll just share my PowerPoint while I set it up. Just want to say this is a paper from a longer paper that I'm writing. A director of a Black European Film Festival got in touch with me and asked me if I could write about a series of queer Black films that he had. Among them were some German ones, and today I'm just presenting my thoughts on the German ones specifically. Okay, so uh, Schwarze Flüchte is perhaps the first example of a mainstream German television series that centers not only Black German protagonists, but several queer Black German protagonists. The show was created by its lead actor, Lamine Leroy Gibba, seen here to the left, who is a native of Hamburg, just like the character he portrays. In addition to Schwarze Früchte and the short film Hundefreund, he was recently involved in the play Blues in Black and White at the Gorky Theater in Berlin. In an interview with the newspaper Welt am Sonntag, Gibba describes Schwarze Früchte as a show, quote, about the everyday lives of two Black queer millennials, end quote. Like so many Black German creators before him, whom people have dissuaded from producing television and film, in this interview, Gibba relays how producers initially weren't convinced that his concept would be of interest to a wider public. Many broadcasters and networks said it was too niche a topic. As Gibba states, and I quote, a lot of people said it won't get made. I was advised not to keep trying, end quote. Gibba provides his explanation for why Schwarze Früchte has been successful, despite those early naysayers. And to quote him again, you don't have to gear everything towards the mainstream. If you show very specific characters and situations, then people will understand, even if they have completely different realities of life and don't know every single code. If you try to make a story extra understandable for everyone, you don't take your audience or your stories seriously. End quote. So, the first examples of Black gay narratives produced for the German mainstream came out in the 1990s when, as Randall Holla remarks, directors distance themselves from what they characterize as the difficult, melancholic new German cinema. Their style, gloss, and seamless edits sought to approach the culture industry of Hollywood on its own terms. Those critics who grew up on the high culture of German art film suddenly found their screens filled uh, with contributions to popular culture and decried it as the end of German film art. Uh, End quote. In his essay, Halle discusses Everything Will Be Fine, as an example of these 1990s comedies. Um, so, in addition to that, there's Doris Dury's comedy Keiner liebt mich, where a black gay character played by actor and director Pierre Sanssouci Bliss has a side role as a friend to the white female protagonist. It took Sanssouci Bliss having to direct the film Zurück auf Los to present a black gay character who is more central to the narrative. When Halle first published his essay in 2005, there were relatively few examples of black German representation in film, let alone written or directed by black Germans. Now, 20 years later, luckily there are many more such examples of black screenwriters, directors, and actors, just like we saw with Shuri Hagen. So, branching off from this comedy wave, Gibba describes Schwarze Früchte as cringe comedy. Alexander Sparrow describes cringe comedy as follows: quote, cringe comedy jokes are illocutionary acts designed to provoke laughter through secondhand embarrassment. By leaving no room between the viewer and the character, embarrassment is maximized, the comedy is less benign, i.e., a stronger violation, and more polarizing as a result. This explains why cringe comedy produces a comedic overhang. End quote. So in Schwarze Früchte, the subject of the cringe comedy varies depending on the situation. Sometimes the source of the cringe are liberal white Germans who see themselves as allies to people of color, but often make very inappropriate comments that demonstrate their lack of understanding about race and their tendency to stereotype people. And I would play this example, but for lack of time, I won't. But basically, in this shot, so Lalo, the character that Giba plays, is visiting his white boyfriend's parents for the first time for dinner, and I think in this scene in particular, the mother goes on this tangent about how she used to date a black man when she was at university and how he reminds her of her ex-boyfriend, and it's just really embarrassing and inappropriate. So, in other cases, Lalo himself is the source of the cringe, mainly because he's very insecure of himself, and an insecurity that's often reflected in how he speaks, which Marie Louise Goldman describes how Lalo's insecurity is reflected in that speech. So he speaks, quote, uh, with a questioning tone that rises at the end of the sentence, with lots of so and English words, end quote. Lalo's tone inflection, perhaps akin to vocal fry, relates to his tendency to people please. Lalo is perhaps the perfect example for what Jeremiah Morlock and Felipe Ziotti Narita call neoliberal impression management. Morlock and Narita write, quote, in the new personality market, getting people to like oneself and on that basis want to hire or do business with oneself rose to become a huge part of things. To make it, a person had to learn to sell themselves, their skills, and their personality to potential buyers in the economy. End quote. And this is what Lalo effectively does, whether with potential romantic partners or employers. And just a side note, I don't have time to discuss. There's another important protagonist in the series, a black woman, Lalo's best friend, and she's also queer. She presents as bi. She has male and female partners, and she's in terms of success, Lalo is having a really difficult time because he left university and he hasn't found a job yet. His female friend, she's doing really successful in the business world, but we see the racism she deals with and sexual harassment. So both of them are kind of trying to play this neoliberal game and failing or succeeding to differing degrees. So Lalo's tendency to people please leads to a lot of awkward lies, such as so in this scene here, he tries to convince. Oh, sorry, not this scene. I think no. So there's another scene, kind of midway through the series, where he tries to convince the owner of an art gallery that he can put on an installation because he left university and he has this dream of being an artist. He has another friend who does visual art. But Lalo in this moment doesn't have a concept for what his exhibit would be about, and he's kind of floundering. And this gallery owner, who's also a like a liberal white German woman, she starts to project all of these like stereotypes on him about his, his black identity, his African identity, and his like need to find out who he is. And he basically like leans into it and accepts it to in order to get the gallery space, even though that's not what he's interested in doing at all. Um, so there's an so this behavior might help him get his foot in the door for new job opportunities, but it can also mean disaster for his romantic life. And that's where this shot is from. So in this scene, Lalo and Tobias have just had sex several days after they officially broke up. And while Tobias sees their relationship as transactional, Lalo tries anything in his power to get Tobias back, even if it means minimizing his own needs and desires. So basically, they have sex. Lalo gets up and starts to dress and goes into the bathroom, and he comes back, and Tobias says to him, "Oh, you didn't come." And they have this like argument about whether Lalo came or not, and it's super embarrassing, but it's all Lalo kind of like trying to make himself small and like accommodating. And Tobias is actually annoyed by this, and it kind of further emphasizes why they broke up. So, um, by marketing Schwarze Früchte as a kind of German comedy, Gibbon can be seen as building on the groundwork laid by Alles wird gut, which Halle describes as creating a unique moment in German film history. And I quote Halle, comedy that brings audiences from Berlin to New York to laugh with Afro German lesbians is not a traditional comedy, end quote. So, in my further discussion of the series Schwarze Früchte, I'd like to highlight a few episodes in particular, which I argue do a lot to progress conversations in Germany about differing experiences within the Black German community. So, starting with the first episode, which opens with Lalo first kissing his boyfriend Tobias, then walking hand in hand with him to Tobias's parents' house, and this is a snapshot, one could argue, of a new post-racial Germany. It has the potential to be a mundane milestone in the arc of a blossoming relationship. In fact, Tobias's white parents don't bat an eye at their gay son bringing home a black boyfriend. They warmly embrace Lalo and seem genuinely happy to see him. They even ask their son ahead of time if there's anything Lalo doesn't like to eat. But it doesn't take long for the romantic facade of Tobias and Lalo's relationship to start to peel away. Um, so this shot, for example, with the shallow focus on Lalo and Tobias blurred in the background, indicates a disconnect between the two. Um, but despite Tobias's mother's attempts to be welcoming, she can't help but betray her feelings of discomfort, a forced smile akin to a scene out of Get Out. After the formalities of introducing everyone, the father boasts about making dinner with some North African spices just for Lalo. The mother speaks about Lalo to Tobias in the third person. She says things like "Der ist groß," um, and this was very reminiscent to me of the way that in Fassbinder's film "Fury It's the Soul," elderly white German woman Emmy speaks about her Moroccan husband to her white German female friends in the third person. One example of the racist microaggressions is what I described before about, Tobias's mom talking about her black boyfriend, but also she also assumes that certain normative practices that would be unfamiliar to Lalo. So like when he first comes into her house, she asks him to take off his shoes, or she makes a big thing out of him taking off his shoes, kind of assuming he wouldn't. And for him, it's very strange because he intended to. So she's kind of treating him as if he didn't grow up in Germany and isn't like acculturated in Germany. Um, Tobias's family could be seen as a model for homonormativity, which Martin Manalansan describes as the following quote: "Homonormativity is a chameleon-like ideology that purports to um, push for progressive causes such as rights to gay marriage and other activisms, but at the same time, it creates a depoliticizing effect on queer communities as it rhetorically remaps and recodes freedom and liberation in terms of privacy, domesticity, and consumption. End quote. In fact, Fatima El Tayeb's critiques about homonormativity in her monograph European Others can be helpful in understanding how Schwarze critiques German neoliberal multiculturalism. El Tayeb describes neoliberalism as maintaining inequitable power relations while framing structural differences as neutral. Thus, Tobias's white German family is presented as liberal, not racist, and tolerant, both towards queer people and people of color. But in reality, both of Tobias's parents commit microaggressions towards Lalo, making assumptions about who he is based on his racialization. And Lalo is expected to play along, be the unthreatening and nice black person who doesn't make white people uncomfortable. What ultimately causes this family dinner to go off the rails is when Lalo insists on being himself rather than a parody of a black person to fulfill Tobias's mother's white guilt. And he also refuses to be a parody of black respectability, which would be the only way he could be good enough for Tobias in their eyes. Although Tobias's parents may be comfortable with diversity of sexualities, races, and ethnicities, they are not comfortable with a diversity of class. Prior to arriving at the house, Tobias warns Lalo, and I quote, Sag ihnen nicht, dass du abgebrochen hast. So don't tell them that you quit university. Um, so when Lalo later defiantly blurts out to the family that he's no longer an architect student, Tobias is visually upset. Lalo's refusal to follow a traditional career path could, from Al Tayyip's perspective, be seen as him refusing the neoliberal doctrine of success. In European Others, El Tayyip demonstrates how, in an age of neoliberalism, those in power discard of discriminatory language. Um, Quote, opposition to material inequality is maligned as class warfare, while race, gender, and sexual inequalities are dismissed as merely cultural, private, or trivial. End quote. El Tayeb adds, and I quote, um, this shift is reflected in current European measures of regulation and oppression, which are presented as necessary to the survival of threatened values of liberty and tolerance, as in fact enhancing them. The limits of the acceptable are determined by an altruistic progress that ultimately leads to ever greater freedom and welfare, excluding only those who refuse participation in this democratic process. While such an argument proposes that in contemporary Europe, self exclusion is the only form of marginalization, the reality, of course, is rather more complicated. When Tobias breaks up with Lalo, he frames it as like Lalo being a failure or like being too much. He's too emotional, too chaotic. But the reality is, Lalo, recently lost his father, who just passed away. He doesn't come from as much means as Tobias. He actually, once Tobias kicks him out of his apartment, he doesn't have a place to live. So his financial position is a lot more precarious. He has a lot less power. But in this kind of like, neoliberal Germany, it's framed as him just like not working hard enough, not being a success. Um, so in Lalo, I see a character who represents the society's fantasy of what a so called post racial existence could look like and the cold reality. Yes, Lalo can meet someone like Tobias on an app and not have to assume he might reject him for being black. He can even reckon with the possibility of a serious long term relationship and the significant milestones of meeting your significant other's parents. However, Tobias is not actually willing to see Lalo as the serious partner that he hopes. The more we learn about the relationship, the more toxic it is revealed to be. In fact, at the conclusion of the first episode, Tobias attempts to break up with Lalo, and Tobias's reaction of how Lalo defends himself against a homophobic attack in the scene is indicative of a commitment to an apolitical existence and Tobias's unwillingness to accept all sides of Lalo, whose very existence and survival as a black person is political. Um, so I only have a couple more minutes, so I'm gonna try to sum up what I was gonna say about about the short film Hundefreund, right? Oh, I did want to say one last thing about Schwarze Früchte. So when Lalo's relationship with Tobias doesn't work out, he later meets another queer black man named Josh. And there's a spark. There seems to be the fact that they might be a good match for each other. And this scene reminded me of some of Audre Lorde's thoughts in the Berlin Years documentary, where she's talking about what's revolutionary about a black woman loving another black woman. So like this idea of black queer love as something liberatory and revolutionary, but even their relationship doesn't really pan out. Um, in part because Lalo uh, really in the at the by the end of the season he realizes he needs to learn to love himself first, and he has a lot of insecurities, and that's why a lot of his relationships aren't working out. So I'll just give a quick summary of Hundefreund. So Hundefreund is a short film that Gibba directed himself, where he plays a completely different kind of character. Again, he's playing a gay black German man, but he's not as like insecure, not as trying to please everyone. He's a lot more assertive. And in this very short film, it's like 12 minutes. We when we're introduced to him, he's getting ready for a date. Um, we see this scene of him standing in front of a mirror. It's all about like self-presentation, like thinking about how he wants to present himself. Then his date comes over, a white man, and there's in this shot, the white man says like, "Oh, I love this contrast," so there's some fetishism. The white man also at one point says to him like, "Oh, I want you to be dominant," and uh, Giba's character in this film gets annoyed with kind of the again microaggression, like racist stuff he's saying. He's like, "Okay, can you just shut up while we have sex? Like, I don't want to hear you anymore." So for me, what's interesting about this film is that basically, while in Schwarze Früchte, Lalo doesn't quite find his voice, like to kind of take his power back. In this short film, what the actor does is he's chained, handcuffed his white male partner to the bed. The partner brought the cuffs, but then he pretends to lose the key and basically like unloads on him how annoying he is and racist, and he's this liberal white German, but he works with refugees and denies people's claims. And then in the end, he laughs and says, "Haha, I found the key." So just to wrap up, I just want to say that to me, the short film in this series present a very diverse view of Black queer German identity, and it's interesting to see how both of them try to use humor to kind of address like racism, microaggression, all these problems with current German society, and still presenting us with very a spectrum, I guess, of black gay German males like perspective. So I'll stop there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that. You've given us a lot to think about. But I'll go to our next presenter and then we'll take questions at the end. I just want to also alert folks who might be joining us for the first time to note that you can put all your questions in our Q&A tab or dialogue box there. So please go ahead as questions arise after or during presentations. Just go ahead and pop them there and we'll get to them after all of our presenters have finished. Okay, so our next presenter is Kasturi Chatterjee, who is a graduate student at the CDG program. They hold an MA in sociology and one in German studies with a major in translation studies. They're interested in Black German studies, literature, art history, and film studies. Their research at the program involves colonial histories and audiovisual and literary production that highlights the silences of historical archival knowledge. Very fitting for our conference theme this year. Currently, they are engaged in a project that studies the presence of Afrosurrealism in Black German literature. Another project they are working on looks at the neocolonial exploitation of African Butterlander, and I'm butchering that, excuse me, for ideological and financial gain during the East German regime, as explored in archival, narrative, audiovisual, and literary production today. In their free time, Kasturi enjoys drawing, cooking food from India, and biking. So we're excited to have their work presented today. Their paper is entitled Precious Ivie and the Cake Europe Ate, Afro-Surrealism and Queering National Belonging. Thanks so much for being here. Yeah. You're still on mute. Go ahead and just unmute. Yeah, it's okay. Happens to the best of us.
Okay, so when I share, could you just let me know that you're seeing the
Yep,
full screen?
I'll give a thumbs.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. Because I'm working with like a second screen, and what happens is that, you know what I mean, right? Okay, right. What are you seeing? Are you seeing?
Not yet.
Oh, God. Wait, I think I'm sharing the wrong thing, so I'm gonna stop again. Uh, Screen two, share. Do you see it now?
Yep, it's coming up right now. Yep, you're good.
So when I change, you can still, can you see the changes? No, right?
You said changes.
Yeah, do you see me like,
I see you, or we still see you, and we also see your screen as well. So
but do you see the changes?
yes, from slide to slide. Yep, I can see you moving back.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah, that's what I wanted.
Mhm.
So basically when I first I want to thank the BGHRA for giving me a second chance to talk about my work with Afrosurrealism in Germany, but also like in German speaking parts of Europe, but also like it's like transnational movement, right? So that's what my idea for this paper also was, like how does this movie by Sarah Blaskiewicz queer the idea of national belonging? And I want to thank the director for very kindly sharing, the private link to her film. I think it was also screened at the GSA last year, which was also quite rewarding to see. So initially, I titled this "Precious Ivie" because that's the English title, and the cake that Europe ate. Then when I started working on it, more like deeply, like started reading the scene, it's actually like chocolate pudding. And I was like, wait, hold on. And then you know how Gen Z says like she ate, and I was like, wait, Ivy ate with that scene, right? Like how she performs, right? So then I changed it to this, the proof in the pudding, which is like another wordplay on like something to eat. And so the film is just like a story of Ivy who grows up with her a white mom and a missing black dad from Dakar, Senegal. And then she realizes as an adult around her 32nd birthday that she has like a half sister named Naomi. And so there's a lot going on in this film, but today I will try to focus on a few aspects that make the film an Afro-surreal work of art for me. And so let's begin. And I also want to thank the BGHRA and my advisor for constantly supporting my work and giving me this platform to present. Okay, sorry, I forgot to say that. I wanted to. So the film's title itself is like Ivy the Ivy, Nen Mich Ivy. And don't call me something else, right? Because her white friends constantly call her Shoko until her sister shows up in her life saying that, hey, our dad passed away. And so Ivy's world suddenly turns upside down. She's like, wait, my dad just passed away? I never even knew my dad. And so she kind of loses her temper at her birthday dinner because she doesn't want to be called Ivy anymore once Naomi has pointed out that, hey, this is wrong. Like, just because she calls you Shoko, do you call her Vanilla? And um her friend Anna, who she lives with, is also very strange, her story, because she says that, yeah, I would love if you called me Vanilla, but like, I don't really care, but it's not the same. And so she has to be told by Naomi that, it's really different, and so Naomi tells her that you actually don't know this, but Ivy doesn't recognize positive racism, so you need to understand. And so how do we get from like the first picture to the second picture? It really makes me like think about the transformation that also happens with cross-racial solidarity in the film. So coming back to this, the title, another thing that I want to mention that all of us can think about is the color purple, also like alluding to Alice Walker's book, but also the color indigo, which has deep spiritual meaning in West Africa, between the spirit world and the living world and all of that. These are just open questions that I wanted to also share with you before I share my reading of this scene and how the film shows a transformation from isolation to community. Because all her life, Ivy grows up kind of like trying to like, I don't want people to notice my hair, she says to Naomi before, leaving for an interview, where she's constantly humiliated and asks, hey, like, can you like tell us about your multicultural side? And Ivie's like, well, I'm German, I don't know what you mean by that, right? And so she constantly has to bite down on her rage, and so it bursts out at this like safe space, I would say, with her friends. But like none of them seem to recognize that she actually feels really unsafe right now. Suddenly that wall between the outside world, where she constantly makes herself smaller, and with her friends, where she can be who she is, her friends are actually not accepting of who she is. So she's like, if I took a shit, would you call it shit from shitter? And so this is what I thought, okay, she's eating with that. That's why I said the pudding Ivy ate. So that's just the title of the paper. And so um, when Anna starts to think about, why she should not call her friend that, that still doesn't change back at the birthday scene, where she says to Ivy, hey, don't take it like that. Don't let it get to you. It's always that. It's like a journey. It's a movement. And that movement for me is very important to understanding what the film is trying to show us in terms of how Ivy and her community, not just in isolation, transform in the narrative. The initial title came from obviously like the Africa Conference in 1884, where like it was cut open like a pumpkin. These were like cartoons from the time. You can see Russia, Africa, and Germany at this table. It's a very famous cartoon from Wikipedia. I mean, you can find it anywhere. And then another one is this one, which actually made me think about the original title too. It's her birthday, the birthday cake, and what's going on here, right? And so I just want to also shout out the DeSACTA project for those of you who are in Berlin or happen to be going there. This is a transnational project that they're gonna be doing for the next few months, but it already has been going on, where they try to do counter spells against the modernity that caused the dissection, the partition of Africa. So when Africa used to look like this before 1884, or at least like before the map was formalized, right, in 1880, it says here, how does it become like this? So that cutting up and reassembling, it doesn't have to be doom, is what the film trying to, I mean, in my reading, kind of tries to show us, right? I mean, I'm from India, and we know the best partition stories, or maybe not the best, but like the most gruesome, right? That people love to see and like specularly like be like, oh wow, this is so great because so many people, this is like the best example of partition. So but then I find partition stories everywhere. And so what this film is trying to show me, at least in my reading, that partition doesn't have to be doom, and there's other kinds of like cuts, other kinds of dividing, setting boundaries that can happen. So one of the boundaries happens, that is broken through, is this wall of silence between Ivy and her white mother, Gabi, where Gabi reveals to her that, your dad and I only knew each other for one night before he left, and he gave me this bracelet, and I think you should have it now. And when Ivy questions that, hey, like, did you never contact him? She finds out that the dad actually never wanted to be with Gabi. And so Ivy's like, wait, so you knew he was in Berlin, but you never even like, you knew about Naomi, my half sister, but you hid this, right? So throughout the film, we see all of these changes happen, and these changes happen because of the slow like revelation to Ivy of her heritage, which is not in isolation, which she always felt alone, and she kind of suppressed her fact of blackness in the Fanonian sense, right? um so this is another very important scene, this intimate scene in the bathroom of Anna and Ivy's Wohngemein shaft, where Naomi starts like stays with them for a while, and she says, I'm German. And then, Anna calls to her, Shoko, do you have any espresso somewhere? And then, she's shocked, right? And then this is where she's telling her that, hey, I don't want to be like, because she asked her, do you want me to do your hair in a tie, a turban, so that you can like go even more confidently for your interview? And Ivy's like, no, I don't want that. So she's constantly, you see this like sense of like suppressing who she is, because she doesn't even know, right? And so there's all these elements, and I think I've explained this one already, so I'm gonna skip over this. And so Ivy says, oh, it's not my best rhyme, but I really need to go. I whatever, Shoko Vanilla Hazelnuts Ishmus, right? And she leaves. But then Naomi lets her know that, Ivy doesn't really know, but I'm gonna let you know that you need to change how you do her, right? And so that a few, I think, scenes later, when the birthday scene actually happens and Ivy does lose her shit, um, because her best friend, and also like she dated Ingo in childhood, but then she gets really mad this time. So this anger is a form of like indication that there's a rupture in her self-image, right? In how she sees herself, how her sister is seeing herself. But that's not the only thing. There are also like constant ways that she's always scratching her skin. I see, right? And then there's not explained. But then she also has hair that she constantly wants to hide, and we see that she goes to after a fight with her best friend Anna, she goes to a hairdresser and says, "Can you cut it all off?" And this lady's like, "Why do you want to do that?" "Because I'm an artist. I do hair because it's a form of art to me," which it is, right? And so Ivie's like, "Well, it's always just in the way." And she finally is able to, like, I don't know, like, it seems like frustration to me more than grief, because she's crying because she's so done with everything, right? She's like, "Just cut it off. I'm so done with everything," right? Shave it off. And so this is one more indication that the partition, the cutting of people in communities live on in our bodies, in our hairs, in the way we speak and who we think we are, and all of those things. And Ivy, throughout the film, is starting to learn who she really is through all of the things that are going on. Sorry, there's some repetitions on the pictures. She gets her hair done like this, and she realizes that how she looks has everything but also very little to do with who she is. And so she tries to even undo her hair by herself, like the braids. And all of this happens with like anger, resignation, all of these feelings, these emotions. To me, they're not just like passing, fleeting things. They're like things that she realizes, or maybe she doesn't, I don't know, maybe. But at the end of the film, it seems like she's opening her eyes, and that's like the Afro-surreal act of like seeing the invisible. So she's trying to be trying to reveal to herself the part of her that has been invisible. And even Naomi, this dream image, right? I wanted to go back to this first slide. And this image of Ivy, tearing open this indigo sheet that is kind of suffocating her, is another, like, two different dreams. Ivy's dream is that the sheet is suffocating her and she tears it open. That's the Afro-surreal, imagery. And then Naomi, she narrates a dream saying, I was shooting myself and I was then bleeding down, walking down the street. I saw someone who shot me, and then I was watching myself, lying bleeding in the street. And then Ingo says to her that maybe it's you. It's like you, the part of you that shot you. It's because it can't accept a certain side of you. It's a very revealing scene. So all of these dream images, or even alluding to a dream that someone saw, it makes the film an Afro-surreal meditation on the part of ourselves that, or like the part of themselves that the characters are finally starting to see, really. Even though Naomi seems like this person who kind of seems very sure of herself. She works at a nightclub in Berlin and as a bouncer, and so she seems to know what she's doing. But even her dream manifests in this like shooting of the self that cannot be accepted, right? Because both of them, as we know now, grew up without a father and have deep trauma because of it, which obviously, Germany, the fact of being German doesn't really allow themselves to be like, well, he must have lived in Senegal, his life doesn't affect me. But that's not true, because this reality of having lost a dad to a death, or to separation before he died, is sort of bursting through their bodies and their dreams. Yeah, and so let's go back to where we were. So the film really stages a rekinning from this rupture. This first picture is from the video that Naomi sends to her after she goes to Senegal, when the father passes away. Because the fact that these two sisters even come together is because Naomi gets a call while she's working in Berlin, from someone in Senegal and from her family, saying that you need to like send money for your father's funeral because he just passed away. And that's the reason Naomi even tries to look up Ivy and tries to find her, that, hey, we have different mothers, we have the same father. And the film ends with, Naomi sending her this video, and Ivy watching it from her house in like Berlin, in Leipzig, where she lives, and watching this video. And she shuts the laptop right at this scene. And then the film camera turns to her face, and then she's looking directly at us, kind of like letting us know that, hey, this is more than just a film, right? This is more than just like me transforming. It's like we can see that her eyes are open finally. She can see, right? She can see that this is a beginning to like recognizing herself, this part of her. But I don't know. To me, all of this was like super Afro surreal and beautiful in the way that it stages all of this. So I just want to end with this other scene that also in the bathroom that happened earlier, where Naomi says to Anna, that's what I mean. Open your eyes. It's an issue out there, because Anna's constantly been like trying to counter that you are pressing your issues from your life into mine and Ivie's by saying that I shouldn't call her Shoko. And like, it's not even like, I've been calling her that for 25 years. It's not even been a thing. Like, you're suddenly making it a thing. And that's what she says. And so I don't know if any of this makes sense, but to me, it makes perfect sense and longer. I didn't want to read out my whole paper. I just wanted to read out, like, tell you guys my concept. And I don't know if it makes sense. But before I end, I just want to like read this from D. Scott Miller's Afro-Surreal Manifesto, where he says, Leopold Senghor, poet, first president of Senegal, African surrealist, made this distinction from surrealism to European surrealism, saying European surrealism is empirical, African surrealism is mystical and metaphorical. Jean-Paul Sartre said that the art of Senghor and the African surrealist or negritude, this movement is revolutionary because it is surrealist, but it itself is surrealist because it is Black. Afro-surrealism sees that all others who create from their actual lived experience are surrealists, but Frida Kahlo, who famously refused the label of a surrealist. She says, I paint my reality. So the root for the Afro can be found in Afro-Asiatic, meaning a shared language between Black, Brown, and Asian peoples of the world. So what was once called the Third World until the two collapsed. So this is from, I just want to like end with this, and I will now just wait. I have to stop sharing. Can you see me still? Do I have time? Because then in that case, I will speak a little bit more.
If you're gonna take a minute just to kind of close out,
Sure.
so
Yeah.
you can, yeah, that'd be good. Okay. Mhm.
Okay, yeah. So for me, the queering of the national belonging is happens because Ivy starts to accept by the end of the film that she is also Senegalese, but she's not only German and Senegalese. She's so much more. That is what it means to see her face at the end after all of that, which has happened in the movie. And it's such a wonderful film. For those of you who haven't seen it, please do watch it. It's just as wonderful as Belief. And so um, yeah. Does that make sense at all, Keith?
It definitely
Okay.
makes sense. It definitely
Okay.
makes sense. And just thank you so much. This is wonderful. Two fascinating presentations. So let me introduce our third speaker, and then we can have a fuller conversation at the end. So our third presenter is Araba Evelyn Johnston-Arthur, who completed her PhD in Black Politics, International Relations, and African Diasporan History at Howard University, and her master's degree in African Studies at the University of Vienna, Austria, and is currently teaching at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. She's one of the founders of Pamoja, movement of the young African diaspora in Austria, that initiated Black History Month in Vienna in 1997. And the research group on Black Austrian history, she's a time traveler, transdisciplinary memory and cultural worker, researcher, lecturer, curator, writer, and recovering storyteller whose work is dedicated to decolonial ecologies of world making, architectures and technologies of reparative remembrances, and the art of mattering and unsilencing poetics of decolonial movements and resistances. Her paper presentation is entitled Unspeakable Things Archived, Notes on Mattering and Flesh Multisectional Political Violence Against the Non-Aligned, Pan-African Resistance in Post-Nazi Austria in the early 60s and beyond. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right? Okay, wonderful. Then I am going to share my slides. And also, if you could just let me know if you can see them. If you can see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction. As the title already notes, I'm sharing today notes with you. So they're really notes. I like to keep that in this open form because this call was a call that really invited me to deepen and open my understanding of the subject matter that I'm working with. So the title is very long, so I'm very long titled. I did my dissertation at Howard University in the US and was there forced to shorten my titles. I did my master's at the University of Vienna. And the just even dealing with the core, like enfleshment, what does enfleshment mean? Really, like I said, invited me to dive deep, also because there's no direct translation of enfleshment into German. So usually I know the other way around, so that there's not always a direct translation from German into English words, but then to really work with something that I could not translate directly. So I feel that those are really still very raw notes that are still cooking, and I feel while I'm talking, I'm still trying to approach what enfleshment means. My relation to English and German is actually started off with English and Finnish, but then later on learned German in kindergarten, and now my German is actually my strongest language in that sense. So the like part of the title is the non-aligned Pan-African resistance in post-Nazi Austria in the early 60s and beyond. I'm going to look at it regarding the Pan-African resistance in the post-Nazi Austria of the early 60s through the specific movement of PASUR, the Pan-African Student Union of Austria, which was founded in 61 and was dissolved officially in 1966. Why is it important for me to include post-Nazi Austria in the title? It is important because Austria has a specificity of a victim myth in dealing or not dealing with its Nazi past. So this movement, which was part of a larger movement of decolonial world making, considerably clashed with regards to its political culture with a post-Nazistic Austria. Now, the image that I'm using is an image that I use a lot, so I wanted to say a bit about that. It's a press photo. As you can see, it's very, the image is, yeah, not very smooth. But if you look at the image now, okay, let me just, yeah, one by one. So the press photo is from an Austrian newspaper that still exists until today. It's from April 1964, so we are in the height of the not so cold, violent Cold War, like the hot Cold War. We are at the crossroads of decolonization and new colonization. And this is the year 1964. You see on the right, Unokama Okonjo, who was the most outspoken president of the Pan-African Student Union of Austria. And then she was also the vice president of the Union of Foreign Students of Austria. And then on the other side, you see Diakola Babajide. Now, what was also said in the introduction, and I'm going to jump between the levels of time, is that I was one of the founders of Pamoja, Movement of the Young African Diaspora, and that was in 1996, unbelievably 30 years ago. So we are having anniversary today, this year, not today, but this year. Now, in this picture, it's also a picture of intergenerational movement politics as well, because Dr. Babajide is also the father of one of our very active members of Pamoja, who is Femi Babajida. Now, coming back to the image now, in this image, in this version of the image, I don't know if you can see it. So you can also see a figure in the back. I don't know, is it seeable or should I make it bigger? Yes. So that's also a figure that you see standing in the back. And with Tina Kamp, posing the question, what do we hear if we, as Tina Kamp invites us to listen to images? So what I'm going to do here now today, as I also already announced, is going to be notes, is going to be questions, a lot of questions. So this is one of the questions I am bringing here. Now, I also wanted to break down some of the wording, some of the concepts that I'm working with. And as you could see in the title, one of the words is mattering, right? And mattering, I understand mattering as a caring decolonial practice of remembrance, of witnessing, of echoing, and bringing unrecognized knowledge into transformative knowing. So the image, I don't know if you can see it, but it's actually in Cape Coast, Ghana. And you see a small version of myself with my father on the left side. I don't know if you can see the figures. Now, one of the aspects that was also mentioned in the introduction is me being a recovering storyteller. What does it mean? What do I mean with being a recovering storyteller? And altogether, I would say, and this ties to the notes of today's talk, being a time-traveling, recovering storyteller and memory worker and mourning daughter, becoming baby elder in decolonial untraining. Now, time traveler also because I made the conscious decision to leave Austria and write my dissertation on the Pan-African, on unsilencing the resistance of the Pan-African Student Union of Austria at Howard University at a historically Black university. So right now I'm in the process of re-arriving after more than 10 years in Washington, D.C., or as I call it in my Maroon Village in Washington, D.C., at deeper realities, deeper Austrian realities. So I'm still catching up with this time. Now, this is a quote from a text from a chapter that was just published last year in the context of the opening of a new artistic cultural space in Vienna, which is called Massacre. Massacre is and I'm sorry, I'm really butchering the word, even though I really tried it and to practice. It's an Amharic word that carries a lot of different meanings. I was told. So it carries grief, it carries hospitality, it carries hospital, it carries many different spaces. So this is a space of the global majority and a space in Vienna. And this text is derived from the opening, from the keynote I gave there from the opening of that space in Vienna. So I have grown into naming myself a recovering storyteller. Today, in the age of surveillance capitalism, it helps me to matter still healing surveillance wounds and scars. And now I go into explaining what exactly is meant with that. So I go into a snippet of Black movement politics and history in Austria. After months of protest, mobilization, through the creation of the network of African communities in Vienna, resisting institutional racism and police brutality in the aftermath of the death of Ahmed Fall in 1999. The then biggest large-scale police operation of the Second Republic of Austria targeted and silenced our collective resistance. Just as explanation, it was said in the beginning, in the introduction, that I was one of the founders of Pomoja, and I was also part of the community organizers through Pomoja of this protest. Operation Spring, as it was called, marked the first use of a major surveillance scheme, in German, großer Lauschangriff. This was justified on the basis of investigating a criminal organization. Locating blackness as, in Simone Brown's words, key sites through which surveillance is practiced, narrated, and enacted, Brown reminds us that surveillance is nothing new for Black folks. It is the fact of anti-Blackness. Now, moving between the levels of time, what this call invited me to look into more deeply is the dimension of political grief. Let's see. And I wanted to, so in the sense of mattering unrecognized knowledge, I wanted to also expand grief to the dimension of disenfranchised grief, according to Docker, or as I would name it, unmattered political grief. Asking me, how is the political violence of organized forgetting the underbelly of Europe's racism amnesia, historical erasure enfleshed? How is grief enfleshed? Now, what's brought me to these questions is I gave you two snippets, one 1999, which was a year of mobilization of the Black community in Austria, where we mobilized ourselves against deadly police violence. And then I showed you in the beginning an image of 1964 of Unokama Konjo, which was also a year of political mobilization. This Pan-African Student Union, which was a union that understood itself as non-aligned within and broke away from the binary logic of the Cold War. This very organization resisted against racism in the 60s. Now, what I forgot in the beginning, I actually wanted to start with acknowledging who made it possible for me to give this talk today. And this is, of course, more than one person, but one of the aspects that I was also, like, levels that I introduced myself as, was also as grieving daughter. My father, who's an ancestor, is the one who unlocked for me this story of resistance in the 60s. While I was active in the 90s, the resistance of the 60s seems completely erased from the present today. So it was only through my father's memory that I got to know about this resistance in the 60s. Now, surveillance, the violence of surveillance has been and is a dimension that is reflected in the silencing of political protests in a global dimension. I mentioned that in 1999, this was then the biggest police raid in the Second Republic of Austria in 1999. The same in 1964. It was there was also a high-profile police raid involved. Now, from the archive, see, I'm just jumping. I'm trying to make sure that my time is also from the archive that I'm working with, and this is the notes, part of the notes that I want to share with you is that Unokamo Okonjo, who was very central in the Pan-African Student Union of Austria, Unokamo Okonjo made sure through her practice to report, to report on the ongoing violence, on the ongoing resistance. So it's because of Unokamo Okonjo's records that my work my work is very much embedded to Unokamo Okonjo's records. Those records were public records because they were reports that were part of press conference reports, or they were also part of the newspaper publications of PASUA, the Pan-African Student Union of Austria. Now, in my notes and my very raw cooking of all the different levels is trying to center Hortense Spils's concept of flesh as narrative. And here there's a quote from Vincius Santiago, who's also a political scientist, that I see myself as transdisciplinary because the subject matter forces me, from my perspective, to be transdisciplinary. But still, I did my PhD in political science, so there's still some sharpened eyes in this perspective. So I just wanted to read this quote for you. From Black Feminist Studies, I emphasize the concept of the flesh as foundational yet neglected aspect of global political and economic systems. It is not only labor power that is extracted from racialized bodies within the global political economy, but something beyond the body per se must be considered. I argue that is the flesh. And the very process of turning certain bodies into flesh that constitutes the conditions of possibility for the global political economy. Now, tying to a second quote, and then I'm going to weave them together by Cecilia Cienfuegos Martinez, politicizing sexual violence from a decolonial feminist perspective. Sexual violence is always political. This is a productive statement because this form of violence is usually taken away from a political reflection. In fact, if anything, sexual violence seems to carry with it some sort of depolitizing effect. It locks its victims in the personal and intimate realms, which in a modern colonial framework means the non-political. Of course, as I'm reading this, the politics of space, I'm currently in the US. This also adds, other dimensions. Why I'm specifically, those two quotes helped me in my approach, in my enfleshed approach to the public counter transcripts, as I want to call it, that Unokamo Okonjo produced. And in one of them, and I'm still struggling how and what and how to approach them, there is a report where she lists, on the one hand, it's herself, but then on the other hand, it's her then husband as well, who makes a report on racist sexual violence that both Unokama Okonjo and her husband at that time, who was also a member of the Pan-African Student Union, endured in the Austrian prison, in Austrian police custody. That's one. The second snippet of the archive, also taken from Unokama Okonjo's counter transcript, is her report that one of the effects of the Pan-African Student Union being surveilled by the Austrian state police was that one of the members suffered a nervous breakdown. Now, both aspects, the nervous breakdown on the one hand, and then the sexual violence on the other hand, are both aspects that I was writing my dissertation on the topic, but I am still struggling how to approach, how to deal, how to find, as Tonya Sutherland would call it, technologies of remembrance that can aid in the process of healing, because this is also, as Sutherland calls it, an archive of trauma. So how to relate to that is a question that I'm still grappling with, that I still haven't found an answer with. An answer. Unokama Okonjo, I should say, is an ancestor. So that is this one aspect. But then the other person is not an ancestor. So those are questions that are still open with regards to. So
And I'm just going to
number
jump in just to give you a
yes,
time marker.
yes.
So it's like one more minute to kind of wrap.
Okay,
I think we
okay,
can still address probably some other points as well in Q&A, but I want to make sure
okay.
we have time for questions.
Okay, then I can, I mean, this being notes,
Mhm.
I can just end here. I would just end with the words of Unokama Okonjo, where she states, "For me, it is not the first time I faced trouble for what I wrote or said. In spite of this, one does not get used to the masked resentment, harassment, intimidating silence, avoidance, and the sense of isolation." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters. This has been wonderful. So much to think about, and thank you for your depth of thought and the many connections you're making. I just want to remind folks to go ahead, and if you have questions, please go ahead and pop those in the Q&A. One is there already, but please go ahead and drop your both questions as well as comments. So sometimes simply you're interested in kind of what's happening, but you also just want to make a comment or observation. So those are welcome as well. Our first comment in the Q&A is for Dr. Layne. The question is from, I think, I believe Dr. Bess. Does the German text use the word queer or the German words for gay, male, homosexual? And I would just kind of also, I guess, maybe add on to that as you were like thinking through this question of or questions around kind of, how progressive, right, are these representations? What does it mean to even kind of sketch as you were kind of like an evolution, right? Or kind of movement from, let's say, cringe to something else. I'm also thinking about even though the concept of queer, which is highly contested, but which in some sense, right, can be read is often read as being a word that represents undecidability, right? Kind of a resistance to naming. And so then
Mhm.
within that project, both the question that Dr. Best is kind of posing of kind of what words are accurate or appropriate, but also then what does it mean to try to contain or represent something which is constantly trying to resist containment or representation. So maybe something speaking to kind of both those ends of the question. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I had to look back at the interview that Giba, the actor and creator of the series, gave. So, in his description of the show, he says it's about Black queer millennials. But I'm pretty sure the white family in the first episode, so the family of the boyfriend, they may use the word schwul, so gay. I'll have to rewatch it and check. But I think if there is the presence of both of these terms, I suspect that. So, in my reading of the series, the main character, Lalo, is a lot more political than Tobias, than his white German boyfriend, because part of what gets discussed is that Tobias is a lot more, well, I described him as homonormative because the way he presents is very masculine. He even at one point criticizes Lalo for not having a deep enough voice. So I feel like even though Tobias is gay, there are other ways that he fits a kind of normativity of society, being a white German, right, of from the middle class. So I feel like a description like queer would be something that Lalo, the black character, would be a lot more comfortable with and feel closer to because of its political resonance. But yeah, so the question about queer and resisting define definitions, I feel like that is part of the reason that that I find the term appropriate for describing the show. Because I feel like we get so many different types of, sexualities and identities in the show between the black male and the black female character. I feel like also as millennials, I feel like they embrace a lot more kind of fluidity of identity, and identity that's constantly changing rather than holding on to these old binaries. So I hope that answers the question, but I do think it would require a rewatching of the episodes to really listen in to see like who's using what term and when. So
Thank you so much for that response. As a kind of follow-up as well, I'm also thinking about in terms of the way that at least it's translated as black fruits. And I'm going to lead into a question for obviously for our other panelists as well. But I think I saw this especially in Kasturi's presentation as well as Araba's as well, kind of a linking kind of back to like the African continent, right? And so black fruits almost sounds as if it's a nod to a type of colonial legacy, right? Kind of saying like this character Lalo, like black folks in Germany or elsewhere, black folks in Europe, right? These are the fruits of a kind of right thinking about, Araba's language in terms of kind of like these colonial crimes and kind of what's kind of spun back around. But it doesn't seem as if like that's acknowledged. But maybe that's just from just like in terms of the analysis and not so much the actual content. So maybe could you speak to any ways in which like the show um, engages or doesn't engage, or what your thoughts are in terms of how it engages with that legacy, or is it simply more about kind of thinking about the modern state and kind of what's operating there?
Um, no, that there is a degree of an engagement with the colonial legacy, but I would say that what the show speaks to is not everyone has the same relationship to that past. So Lalo is constantly meeting other Black German people who have maybe a different relationship to their parents, to the African continent, to their roots. Like at in the last episode, he meets a woman whose family I think is from this also from West Africa, and she speaks like a local dialect and he doesn't. So there's this constant like sense of like performativity, right? And like he's Black German, but is he Black enough, right? Does he know enough about the country his father is from? And for example, I mentioned that when he wants to put on that exhibit, this white woman is like, "Oh yeah, it can be about your search for identity and your relationship to Africa," and that's all projection. That's not things that he's thinking about. So I feel like that discourse is there, but to what extent the main character is thinking of those things, that's less clear. And I feel like part of what's really difficult of like teasing out, I guess, kind of like what is the trauma that informs his presence, his being, is there's a lot of trauma around like gender identity. Like we see flashbacks of him in school and like getting teased for being too feminine and having like a crush on a white male friend who's straight and getting kind of like a like exploited by him. So I'd have to think more about. I think there's definitely space for the reflections on the colonial, but I have to think about like how that relates to the other types of trauma he's dealing with. But one of the things that's helpful to think about is I hadn't yet thought about like how do I interpret the title of the show, especially like the main poster that Day uses for the show, which is like it's kind of like Lalo and his friend floating in juice. So like I feel like okay, you could have the like black fruit. Maybe that's a nod to colonial products. I also thought of like fruit as like a like offensive right? Like is it saying something about his like gender presentation? I think those both of those readings are possible, and I'll have to reflect a little bit more about what could be intended with that title.
Mhm. No, thank you so much for that, right? Because I mean, that's where my mind was kind of wondering, but I wasn't sure kind of how much to read into it or not. But speaking of food, I mean, this is the perfect transition to Kasturi's presentation and thinking through kind of the pudding, the pie, the cake, the eating of it, etc. And the one of the moments, I mean, there's kind of several striking moments you identify. Thank you so much for the visuals. They really kind of helped me to think through what you were presenting. I was struck by the one moment where Ivy is also smearing, right, the pudding or smearing the cake on the face. And so, depending on kind of the national context and the kind of racial history, it felt as if it's a merging kind of histories of blackface, right? But then also kind of thinking through like psychoanalytic or readings of the oral and kind of what's happening with can the shitter, like all those things, right, kind of were happening. And I was wondering then kind of how you were kind of reading, especially at the dinner table, like the ways in which Ivy's also being, I think she's trying to also like defend a certain kind of space or make space, but then also kind of fighting consumption, right? And maybe you could speak to kind of just the ways in which you're seeing kind of food operate as metaphor, as in terms of appetites, like how you were thinking through what was happening, both in that scene, but also just more generally. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for this question. The idea of consuming Ivy as like, she's is rampant through the film, right? She is interviewing to teach at this very fancy private school where she goes to buy like a sort of like a one piece with her friend Anna. And Anna absolutely does not she supports Ivy and her dreams, and Ivy has gone to, sie hat studiert, she's gone to college. And so right now in the beginning of the film, she's a kindergarten teacher. And so like she takes care of these like kids and they love her, right? But then Ingo and Anna, her best friends, are like, why do you want to leave this job? I understand you studied, so you want to teach at a better paying position and all of that. But why this private fancy school? They're never going to understand who you are as a person because you're so wonderful. And her friends actually do support her, but they don't understand why Ivy wants to like make that change, right? Teach at the school. So in all of these interviews, she is constantly like seen as this like multicultural person who like immigrant children are going to identify with. And she constantly like tries to like explain to them, hey, I'm like German, I don't know what you mean. But she obviously can't say that out loud, so she tries to say that my mom lives here in Leipzig, like blah blah blah. And she tries to even question this person, this interviewer who's like filming the whole thing for like a higher up like in the school system. So that pedagogical aspect of like teaching Ivy to like be the right kind of multicultural teacher is one kind of consumption. Then like the coffee in dialogue that I showed, like where have you put the coffee, right? That emerges as a colonial product. The chocolate definitely, like when she's hooking up with this guy that she met in the bus one day, like he's also invited to the dinner table, and Ivy tells this guy like, on her birthday, let's go, I can't deal with this place anymore. And they leave and they go back to Ivie's apartment, and this guy tells her, don't worry about, and Ivie's like, do you also want to lick me? And then this guy is like, you do taste wonderful, but he says this is this intimate space to her. He doesn't mean it badly, but Ivie absolutely cannot, like, go on with that makeout scene in that case where she's already so angry. And this guy is very understanding. He says, I know you need your space. And Ivie's like, yeah, you better leave right now because I can't deal. I've got too much going on. And this guy is very respectful of that. But despite trying their best, a lot of the white characters, in their liberalism, in their like individual way of thinking about consumption and production, are not able to understand what Ivie's really going through, because this, I don't know how to explain this, but like, this missing father is suddenly present as soon as he's dead, right? So, and also the idea of this missing father, the reason that he even came to Leipzig to like be with Ivie's mother, or like he was a student there and he just met her at a party, and then they hooked up for one night, and then we don't get any explanations for why he left. Really, there's no conclusive explanation. But he was being consumed, and we know, like, African students, Vietnamese students, all kinds of students of color were coming into East Germany, were being trained, and then they were sent back, a lot of them. That's the story that a lot of like people have told, including Birgit Weyer and Hamad German, is like how they still haven't been paid for the labor that they did. So this idea of consuming the black person is like a huge like background against which like Ivy as like a story unfolds to me. I don't know if I answered the question, but like there's so much more that goes on than this.
No,
Yeah.
no, you definitely did. Thank you so much. And I love the way you kind of connected both the ways in which the language is working on that level, but also the pedagogical spaces that kind of operate in consumptive ways. I think all that makes a lot of sense. There are a couple questions. Well, one question and also a comment in the Q&A. So from Maria Grew or Grewe, might be not pronouncing it properly. Thank you to all three speakers for these fabulous presentations. I'm curious if Priscilla and or Kasturi could speak to the reception of the show and film in Germany, specifically among white liberal Germans. Do the pointed critiques about microaggressions and more even register, or is it seen as entertainment slash comedy? And then also just want to, while that's there, while you're thinking about that, just also pose a question for Araba as well, related to what you were just finished saying, Kasturi, about kind of grief. Because as you're saying, like it begins with her saying, we're finding out that she has a father who just passed away. And so the impossibility of grief when you're grieving something which you didn't even know was kind of really there, right? Right, kind of how to account for that. And I think Araba as well in your in your notes, you kind of did a really good job of thinking through like what does it mean to kind of grief, to have grief when there isn't like a site, there isn't a physical object, there isn't something which kind of can provide flesh for, right? The object, which is the person, right, which is being missed. So I would like to kind of have you think about that while Priscilla and Kasturi kind of answer the first point. Yeah.
Well, I can say to the reception of the film or the series, so I've only been able to find reviews from newspapers, so like in the feuilleton, like journalists writing about it. I haven't been able to find what just like average viewers say. I'm usually on Reddit and I can't find anything there. Maybe I need to go on TikTok. I'm not sure if anyone has any suggestions for how to find out. Yeah, like audience reception, that would be great. So, but thanks for the question.
Um, for me, this film was super hard to locate. Even though Priscilla, who's my advisor, by the way, thank you so much. She tried a lot to like help me, maybe ask the Goethe Institute for like a copy, but I couldn't locate that. And even my library gave up. When Duke Libraries gives up, something's wrong. I mean, it's like rare. So like I'm like, okay, I can't get a loan. So I contacted Sarah Blaskiewicz, who Priscilla and I had like the opportunity to interview her a couple years, maybe exactly a year ago and a half, and she was very kind to share with me the private Vimeo link, which was passworded, and she was very like, I can't wait to share my article with her later on. But yeah, that's how I actually ended up watching the film, because I really wanted to write about this because I'd seen it during the summer, but I lost the link for it. So I'm not really aware, but I did respond to Maria with like who, by the way, hi Maria, so good to have you here. I found a few reviews of it, by Dirty Movies. It's like a blog or something, and it has a pretty like decent review of it. And there's like a few like that. But again, I'm not sure how it was, received in Germany or outside of like German studies circles, since it's like I think it's good that she kind of protects it in the same way that Natasha Kelly would protect I Am Millie, because Natasha Kelly says it so well. She says, these films that are so intimate and like portraits of Black life in Germany sometimes get shown in like predominantly white liberal audiences, where they get interpreted without like any oversight from like people that who work really hard to make these pieces of art. And then the discourse is completely like eaten in the way that like bell hooks eating the other. And so I think it's good that these films are protected and not like available on YouTube. And I mean, I love it when stuff is available, but like also sometimes it's problematic. So that's why I think yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in. Thank you all for for your presentations as well. I'm taking so much with me. Thank you, Keith, also for the question. I wanted to tie it also real quick to the first question of colonial and unacknowledged. I talked about Austria's victim myth. This is also combined with part of Austria's political identity is to have never had anything to supposedly to do with colonies. So there is, on the one hand, a history of unacknowledgement, but also a long history of actually struggling of racism critique, like in the 60s already, which was a racism critique also of Austrians' coloniality. The second question, what was the second question? I lost my thread. I'm trying to be so quick because I know we don't have a lot of time left. What was the second question, Keith? Sorry.
Well, really about the question of memory, like grief and memory. So how
Ah,
to remember something, the case from Kasturi's film in terms of remembering a father who you have no knowledge of, and so how to kind of reconcile those two. And that's also while since we're kind of short on
yeah,
time at the end, I'll just acknowledge the question by an anonymous attendee also asking about the father, questions about family and polygamy and kind of how to think about like how much knowledge the character might have. So, but your question really is about, right, what is your thinking on kind of the difficulty of memory when it comes to enfleshing grief, which is immaterial in some sense already. Yeah.
right. So I'm thinking of real quick of Aiko Amar's, I think it's in Healers, forgetting because remembrance hasn't been to remember hasn't been safe. It hasn't been safe to remember. And what I couldn't really flesh out so much is also the grief of the stories that were held back that we yearned to hear as well. So basically also grieving what has been erased, but is never completely erased as well. So this level of enfleshment, I'm so grateful for the organizers for this call because it really forced me to, look also deeper into also language, how language is enfleshed. That was very raw, but that was my idea with the German, English, how that impacts, how that is also epistemic, those levels and how that relates to grief. Yeah. So try to be short.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for that. And I'll allow, since there was the last question, I think was for Castori, that you, I'll just like, allow her to respond to that last bit, if you'd like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like really quickly, I'll just say that the father does like know about Ivy, but he doesn't want to acknowledge her. For whatever reasons, it's not explained. It's so on Ivy's birthday, her mom takes her to the park, and they go rowing in a boat, and they sit and have some like zect or something. And the mom gives her this bracelet from her dad, and then Ivy's like, "Well, did you never contact him?" And the mom reveals that, "Yeah, I did, but I also I told him that you should know him. My daughter needs to have a father, or at least like know a little bit about him." But her father just wrote back saying that I have started another family, clearly Naomi's family in Berlin. But then years pass, and then the father basically doesn't want to have any contact with Ivy, is what the film implies in the dialogue. So that's, I mean, make of that what you will. But I feel like the father was probably like constrained within his like bicultural or multicultural, like, what's it called, the responsibilities towards his family in Senegal, but also towards Naomi. And Naomi also only has one picture. It appears in like of the same fountain that she works outside, like next to. She comes out of the store and smokes at this fountain, and there's a picture that she has of her dad as like when she's a toddler and her dad is there. That's the only thing. And Ivie and her fight about that. Ivie's like, you've been hiding this photo from me, and they have a fight and they are angry with each other, but then they reconcile, understanding that it doesn't have to be this break within their themselves, doesn't have to be the end of anything. In fact, it could be a beautiful beginning of having a sister that you now can get to know. So yeah.
Which is such a powerful thing to think about in terms of like the work that picture then has to do. Like the one photo has to create like all these narratives and mythology to sustain right relationships. But thank you so much to all three of our presenters. We are a bit over time, so I don't want to take anybody over the limit. But we appreciate all of you. Such fascinating work, and thanks to our organizers for putting this particular collection as well together. Thank you, Priscilla, Kasturi, and Araba. We appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Keith.
Lovely
Thank
Thank you
meeting
you,
so
you.
Araba
much.
and
Thank you.
Kasturi.